Every life is shaped by the size of the goals one sets and the level of effort one is willing to apply. Grant Cardone begins with a confronting truth. Most people live lives that are too small for them, not because life has denied them opportunity, but because they have unknowingly adjusted themselves downward to fit comfort, social expectations, and fear. People often grow up being told to be realistic, to avoid disappointment, to aim for something practical, to not ask for too much, and to be grateful for what they have, so as not to appear greedy. These ideas sound wise and humble, but they are often the very things that suffocate potential. People learn to shrink their dreams long before they ever attempt them. A child, for example, dreams without limit. A child says, "I will be a pilot, I will be a star, I will build a skyscraper." And no part of that child's mind questions the possibility. But as years pass, the world conditions the imagination into fear. Teachers sometimes discourage. Parents, trying to be protective, insist on safety. Friends mock ambition because it threatens their own sense of limitation. Society praises average effort and average dreams. Eventually, people stop seeing the extraordinary as possible. They begin planning their life based on what they already see instead of what they have the potential to become. This is where mediocrity begins, not out of failure, but out of fear of reaching for more. Cardone argues that the tragedy of most lives is not that they fail to reach their goals, but rather that their goals were never large enough to demand greatness. If someone sets a goal to merely have enough to live, then even if they achieve it, they have imprisoned themselves in survival. If someone sets a goal to not struggle, then the best they can hope for is a life free of crisis, but also free of greatness. There is a simple psychological law. Small goals create small energy. Small energy creates small effort. Small effort creates small results. This is why so many people wake up tired, not because they work too hard, but because they are working on too little. The human spirit is energized by challenge. The soul awakens when it has something meaningful and large to strive toward. When goals are too small, life becomes routine, repetitive, and emotionally dull. Cardone insists that the goal must be big enough to excite you, scare you, and pull you forward. A goal that does not intimidate you is not worthy of you. A goal should be so large that it forces you to grow mentally, emotionally, financially, socially, and spiritually. It is in this context that the 10x rule emerges. Whatever goal you currently want, multiply it by 10. Whatever effort you think is required, multiply that effort by 10. This is not about exaggeration. It is about aligning expectations with reality. Because achieving anything meaningful takes far more time, energy, courage, and persistence than people initially estimate. For instance, someone may decide they want to start a business. They imagine finding customers quickly, making enough to sustain operations, and growing steadily. But when customers hesitate, when expenses rise, when operations get messy, they lose momentum, not because the goal was impossible, but because they underestimated the intensity of the journey. Success is not simply hard. It is much harder than people assume. But it is also much more rewarding than people imagine. This is why moderate effort fails. Because reality does not reward the average. Average effort leads to average results. And average results lead to frustration, regret, and bitterness. When someone applies 10x levels of action, they do not just push harder, they force life to respond. They generate momentum. They become difficult to ignore. They create opportunities instead of waiting for them. They get noticed. They gain skill faster. They make mistakes faster and learn from them faster. They become sharper, tougher, clearer, stronger. This is visible everywhere. Look at Elon Musk. Whether people admire him or dislike him, no one denies that he acts with absolute, overwhelming scale. His goals are absurdly large: colonize Mars, revolutionize transportation, rewire energy grids, reimagine aerospace engineering. These are not 2x goals. They are 10x and beyond. And because the goals are massive, the effort matches the scale. Look at Oprah Winfrey rising from rural poverty to global cultural influence, not by seeking a good job, but by aiming to transform media and storytelling at a world level. Look at Jay-Z, who began as an underground rapper but envisioned building an empire. Music, fashion, sports management, luxury branding, equity stakes, far larger than the art form he started in. Look at Aliko Dangote in Africa, who did not aim to build a small business, but to become a continent-defining industrial force. Their initial environments, resources, and conditions did not predict their outcomes. Their goals and scale of action did. However, simply understanding the need for bigger goals is not enough. The mind must also accept that massive action is the only standard. The 10x rule teaches that if the amount of effort you are applying does not exhaust normal people, confuse critics, or create noticeable acceleration, then the effort is not yet 10x. It is not enough to try, not enough to work hard, not enough to be dedicated. You must become obsessed. Cardone does not hide this word. He embraces it. Society often treats obsession as a flaw, but obsession is simply the concentration of energy. Every major breakthrough in history, artistic, scientific, athletic, business, cultural, was driven by someone obsessed with an idea, a vision, a mission. Obsession is where identity aligns with purpose. When you are obsessed, you do not need motivation. You do not need reminders. You do not procrastinate. You move. You act. You live inside your mission. And that is the psychological core of the 10x rule. Turn your purpose into your operating state. Not a task. Not a schedule. A state. The moment a person commits to operating at 10x levels, something surprising happens. Resistance rises. Not the resistance of the world at first, but the resistance of the self. The mind begins whispering fear. Fear of failure. Fear of embarrassment. Fear of being judged. Fear of wasting time. Fear of stepping outside what is familiar and predictable. This is the psychological threshold where most people retreat. Grant Cardone emphasizes that fear is not a sign to stop. It is a compass pointing directly toward what must be done. The things we fear doing are almost always the very things that would change our lives most dramatically. If calling a prospect terrifies you, that is the call that holds the breakthrough. If speaking publicly shakes you, that stage holds a version of you that is more powerful and respected. If starting that business scares you, that business holds a life beyond survival. Fear is not an enemy. Fear is a mirror showing exactly where you need to move. But people are taught to wait until they feel ready, as if courage is supposed to precede action. Cardone argues that this is backward. Action must precede courage, because courage is something built through evidence, not imagination. When someone begins doing what they fear, the fear recedes. Confidence is born not through thinking positively, but through acting while afraid. Life rewards movement, not contemplation. And yet, even when a person overcomes fear long enough to begin, another obstacle arises. The world pushes back. Effort does not immediately equal progress. Action does not immediately produce results. This is the point where the average person concludes, maybe this doesn't work. Not because they failed, but because they expected results too soon. Cardone explains that one of the most common reasons people stay mediocre is that they underestimate how much effort is required to succeed. They believe success should unfold faster, easier, more conveniently. But meaningful success is slow, uneven, inconsistent, and often discouraging in its early phases. The world does not open the door simply because you knock once. You must knock relentlessly, loudly, repeatedly, until the world is forced to pay attention. This is where the concept of massive action becomes essential. There are 4 levels of action, though most people only ever use 1 or 2. The first is doing nothing, which many choose unconsciously. The second is retreating, moving backward due to fear or disappointment. The third is taking average action, working just enough to feel busy, to earn approval, to claim I tried. But the 4th level, massive action, is where transformation occurs. Massive action means not stopping, not slowing down, not adjusting your goals downward to match the pace of results. It means increasing effort when progress is slow, amplifying focus when results seem distant. Most people respond to discouragement by reducing effort. But those who live the 10x rule respond by increasing intensity. This intensity is not reckless. It is purposeful. It is the deliberate flooding of life with so much action that circumstances can no longer remain unchanged. History is full of this pattern. When Thomas Edison was developing the light bulb, he did not say, "Well, this didn't work the first few times." He conducted over 10,000 experiments. When asked if he was discouraged by failing 10,000 times, he replied, "I did not fail. I discovered 10,000 ways that do not work." The difference between average and extraordinary is the willingness to keep going past the point where others stop. The same principle is visible in modern culture. Beyoncé did not become a global icon through talent alone. Her rehearsals are famously grueling, multi-hour sessions long after mastery has been achieved. Michael Jordan was not simply gifted. He outworked every teammate, arriving earlier, leaving later, practicing weaknesses relentlessly. Jeff Bezos did not slowly, casually build Amazon. He reinvested every dollar, expanded aggressively, and operated with long-term vision when competitors could not imagine that scale. These are not stories of luck. They are stories of relentless action. However, massive action alone is not enough without a foundational belief that shapes how one interprets life: the belief in total responsibility. Cardone argues that the moment you decide to take responsibility for everything in your life, your outcomes, your circumstances, your opportunities, your failures, you regain power. People often give away their power by blaming external forces: the economy, the government, their parents, the market, the algorithm, society, luck. But the moment you blame, you become powerless. Blame is emotional surrender, disguised as rational explanation. Taking responsibility does not mean everything is your fault. It means everything is your response. You may not control the initial condition, but you always control the response. And the response is what shapes the future. This is why some people in the same environment rise while others fall. Two people may experience the same setback. One interprets it as proof that the goal is impossible. The other interprets it as a signal to increase intensity. The difference is not in circumstance, it is in mindset. Responsibility generates momentum because it eliminates waiting. When you stop waiting, life accelerates. At this point, something powerful begins to happen. Consistent massive action starts to compound. Momentum begins to build. Opportunities begin to surface that were previously invisible. People begin to take notice. And this is where a new challenge appears: critics. Cardone points out that criticism is not a sign you are wrong. It is often a sign that you are finally visible. People criticize what they cannot ignore. No one criticizes the invisible. When you are average, no one cares what you do. When you begin to rise, people feel threatened. They project their insecurities. They mock, doubt, resist, and discourage, not because your growth harms them, but because your growth reminds them of their own stagnation. The moment someone begins to expand, they disrupt the emotional equilibrium of their environment. If a person grows while their circle remains the same, the circle will try to pull them back, not consciously, but instinctively, like gravity. Cardone warns that if you try to maintain the approval of others, you will abandon your higher path. You must choose between acceptance and greatness. This does not mean arrogance. It means detachment from dependency. You can love people without adopting their limits. You can care for them without shrinking to match their comfort. The greatest act of leadership is to expand so fully that your growth inspires others to expand themselves. Momentum is powerful, but extremely fragile. Cardone explains that once momentum begins, you must protect it ruthlessly. Momentum is like a fire. It grows when fed and dies when neglected. Many people achieve early progress and then relax, believing they have earned rest. But momentum punished neglect. The fire shrinks. The opportunities fade. The world moves on. This is why Cardone argues that success must transform into lifestyle, not a project, not a phase, not a temporary sprint, but a permanent operating identity. You do not work hard until you succeed. You become the kind of person who works at 10x levels as your default state. Success is not an event. It is a character. This transformation requires redefinition of self. You stop identifying as someone who wants success and begin identifying as someone who creates success. You stop seeing effort as sacrifice and begin seeing effort as your natural expression of purpose. You stop waiting for motivation and start living as the embodiment of discipline. At this stage, goals expand again. What once felt impossible now feels small. The person who once doubted if they could survive now asks how they can transform industries. The person who once feared failure now seeks challenge. The person who once asked for permission now moves with authority. Identity has shifted. And identity is destiny. When a person reaches the point where 10x effort becomes identity rather than technique, the nature of their goals begins to transform. Goals are no longer created simply to achieve comfort or security, because those things have already been surpassed. Comfort becomes a byproduct, not a target. Instead, the aim becomes expansion, influence, legacy, and the creation of something that reshapes environments rather than just surviving within them. At this stage, the question shifts from what do I want to what am I building that will remain long after I am gone. For some, this means building a company that will outlive them. For others, it is a philosophy, a message, a piece of culture, a model of excellence, or a family standard that alters the trajectory of generations. Grant Cardone often highlights that real wealth is not measured in possessions, but in impact and control. The control of time, the control of opportunities, the control of environment, and the ability to create outcomes rather than react to them. Accumulating money is a part of this process, but the accumulation is secondary. Money is the reward for value delivered at scale. The greater the scale, the greater the reward. This is why the 10x rule inevitably leads to scale. Once a person understands that the world responds to massive value delivered massively, they stop thinking in small units. They stop asking, how can I sell one item? And instead ask, how can I create a system that distributes value to thousands? They stop asking, how can I get one client? And instead ask, how can I build a pipeline that attracts clients continuously? They stop asking, how do I earn enough to live? And begin asking, how do I structure my life so that effort multiplies itself? This shift marks the transition from effort-based success to system-based success. Effort can build momentum, but only systems maintain it. Systems allow a person to continue creating results even when their personal energy fluctuates, their time becomes limited, or their attention must shift. Think of McDonald's. Its founder, Ray Kroc, did not simply sell burgers. He built a system of consistency so refined that a Big Mac tastes the same in New York, Lagos, Dubai, and Tokyo. The product was not the food. The product was the system. Steve Jobs did not build Apple by making computers with his own hands. He built a culture of innovation, aesthetics, and user simplicity that continued after him. The system sustained the momentum. Grant Cardone himself did not build his real estate empire one building at a time. He created acquisition models, funding frameworks, training infrastructures, and content systems that scale indefinitely. Systems amplify human ability, and scaling requires this amplification. However, building systems demands something most people avoid: precision and accountability. It requires measuring results, refining errors, tracking patterns, removing inefficiencies, and confronting uncomfortable truths about performance. Many individuals prefer vague ambition because it protects them from measurable failure. But vagueness also prevents measurable success. Precision is confrontational. Precision demands honesty. Once precision is embraced, growth accelerates again. And with growth comes pressure. Contrary to what many believe, success does not reduce pressure, it increases it. But the quality of pressure changes from survival pressure to performance pressure, which is a far higher and more meaningful form. Survival pressure is heavy and suffocating. Performance pressure is elevating. It signifies relevance, responsibility, consequence. This is why the most successful individuals in any field appear intense. They are not stressed by chaos. They are fueled by responsibility. They have reached a level where life expands rather than collapses under weight. Yet, even at this level, the journey is not without challenges. One of the greatest threats to sustained success is complacency. Complacency is subtle. It does not announce itself. It arrives disguised as satisfaction, disguised as rest, disguised as stability. It whispers, "You've done enough. Slow down. Take it easy. You deserve to coast." But coasting is simply slow decline in disguise. Every city that once thrived and later decayed did so because its builders believed the work was finished. Every empire fell when it believed growth was no longer necessary. Every organization that becomes arrogant begins shrinking the moment expansion stops. The laws of growth are universal. Momentum must be maintained. This is why Cardone emphasizes that success must be approached with the same intensity used to achieve it. The level of action that created the breakthrough is the level of action required to sustain the breakthrough. A lion does not hunt once and retire. It hunts continuously, not because it is hungry every hour, but because its identity is tied to its dominance. In the same way, the 10x individual does not work hard sometimes. They live in a state of intentional, directed expansion. And through this way of living, something profound happens. You begin to separate from competition entirely. When effort is massive and continuous, there is no competition, because most people do not have the endurance or discipline to maintain that level of execution. Average effort creates crowded markets. 10x effort creates uncontested space. This is how companies become industry leaders. This is how athletes become legends. This is how artists become icons. This is how nations become superpowers. This is how individuals become unavoidable. When your presence, your output, your mastery, and your consistency exceed the threshold at which others operate, you no longer compete. You redefine the environment. And that is the essence of the 10x rule, to live in such a way that the world cannot help but respond. Not by chance. Not by talent alone, not by temporary motivation, but through identity-backed, system-supported, relentlessly sustained massive action. The world provides countless examples of how 10x thinking reshapes reality across cultures, industries, and eras. Consider Elon Musk. Whether one agrees with his personality or not is irrelevant. What matters is that he repeatedly sets goals so large that they appear unreasonable. When he said he would create reusable rockets, the aerospace industry laughed. Engineers insisted it was impossible. Governments dismissed it. Universities treated it as fantasy. Yet, while others debated feasibility, Musk operated from the assumption that it must be done. And not someday, but now. He poured resources, endured public failure, and watched rockets explode live on global broadcasts. Where most would interpret failure as a sign to stop, he used failure as data. Today, SpaceX lands rockets vertically as casually as airplanes land on runways. The impossible became routine. That is the 10x effect. Across the world in Nigeria, we see a different example in the rise of Afrobeats, from local sound to global export. Artists like Burna Boy and Wizkid were not merely making music. They were redefining a cultural narrative. For decades, African artists were told global markets would not value their sound. But these artists did not scale back to match the world's expectations. They expanded until the world adjusted to theirs. Burna Boy filling stadiums in London, Paris, and New York did not happen because he played cautiously. It happened because he approached his craft, branding, messaging, and performance with massive, assertive ambition. He made the world accommodate him. That is the 10x rule in cultural form. Expansion until resistance breaks. In business, Amazon stands as one of the clearest embodiments. Jeff Bezos did not simply want to sell books. His intention from the beginning was to redefine commerce itself. While every competitor planned year to year, he planned decade to decade. While others optimized stores, inventory, and shelf space, he optimized systems, logistics, data, and infrastructure. When Wall Street pressured him for quick profit, he refused. And when the profits finally came, they came not in increments, but in billions. This is what happens when goals exceed conventional logic and effort exceeds conventional endurance. In sports, Kobe Bryant represented this principle in human form. His work ethic was so extreme that teammates would wake up at dawn to train only to find he had already completed drills. He trained harder because he expected more, not in comparison to others, but in devotion to his own standard. Excellence became identity. The outcome was inevitable. In the Middle East, Dubai demonstrates the rule at national scale. In the 1990s, Dubai was largely desert. Its leaders could have settled for moderate development. Instead, they imagined a global hub of tourism, finance, and architecture. They built islands shaped like palms and skylines that redefined engineering limits. What once seemed excessive is now admired, visited, and studied. Vision, when supported by relentless execution, reshapes geography itself. The common thread among all these examples is not genius or luck. It is the willingness to act beyond the scale of ordinary ambition, to pursue goals so large they demand reinvention of self, systems, discipline, and persistence. But sustaining 10x output requires something deeper than motivation. Motivation fades. The person who depends on emotional energy to act will always fall behind the one who acts independently of emotion. The 10x mindset is grounded in commitment, not feeling. Commitment is the decision to do the thing whether conditions are ideal or not. The average person acts when they feel ready. The 10x individual acts because the action is required. Over time, this creates a second transformation. The relationship with failure changes. Failure stops being personal. Failure stops being threatening. Failure becomes informational. It becomes feedback, calibration, refinement. This is why those operating at the highest levels often appear calm under pressure. They have failed so many times that failure no longer intimidates them. They expect setbacks because they understand progress is built through friction. This resilience is not developed by reading or thinking. It is developed by doing. It is developed in the repetition, the long nights, the disappointments, the rejections, the uncertainty, the rebuilding. Every time a person continues forward after failure, their capacity expands. Their tolerance strengthens. Their vision stabilizes. Eventually, the inner world becomes unshakable. Once the inner world is fortified, external circumstances lose their power. Markets can shift, opinions can fluctuate, opportunities can close, and the 10x individual continues their trajectory because the foundation is not external. The foundation is identity, discipline, and self-generated momentum. At this point, something remarkable happens. The person who once chased opportunities now attracts them. The world responds to consistency. The world responds to certainty. People trust those who trust themselves. Investors follow confidence. Partners follow clarity. Audiences follow authenticity. The market is drawn to the person who moves with purpose. And now we arrive at the final, most profound realization of the 10x rule. The ultimate objective of massive action is to become a force. A force is not dependent on circumstances. A force is not defined by environment. A force does not wait for chances. A force creates conditions. This does not require perfection. It requires refusal. Refusal to remain small. Refusal to accept limitation. Refusal to wait for permission. Refusal to be ordinary. When a person commits to operating at 10x scale, they set a new internal standard for being. Identity shifts. Behavior aligns. Discipline reinforces. Environment adapts. And life transforms not gradually, but dramatically. Because the 10x rule is not just about working harder. It is about becoming someone impossible to ignore. At the end of everything, the 10x rule is not about chasing achievements simply to impress the world. It is about expanding the boundaries of who you are and what you believe is possible. It is about refusing to live a life structured by fear, hesitation, or the expectations of the average. It is about stepping into a scale of existence where your actions carry weight, your efforts create ripples, and your presence leaves an imprint. Greatness was never designed for the comfortable. It belongs to those who are willing to demand more from themselves than anyone else ever will. It belongs to those who would rather fail boldly than shrink safely. It belongs to those who do not simply wish for change, but insist on it. In every age, in every nation, in every field, the individuals who shape the world are not the ones who played it safe. They are the ones who dared to imagine something larger than themselves, and then backed that vision with relentless action. Whether building cities from desert sands, turning local culture into global influence, shaping industries that redefine economies, or simply breaking through personal ceilings that once felt immovable, the pattern is the same. Extraordinary outcomes require extraordinary commitment. Most people are taught to dream modestly, to hope quietly, to move cautiously. But the truth is this: life does not reward caution. Life rewards boldness. Life rewards those who step forward while others hesitate. Life rewards those who choose intensity over passivity, clarity over confusion, and endurance over comfort. When a person decides to operate at 10x effort, life begins to bend. Barriers shift. Opportunities multiply. Identity strengthens. The world cannot continue treating a person as ordinary once they have stopped treating themselves that way. And in time, the impossible begins to feel inevitable. You were never meant to live small. You were never meant to wait for permission. You were never meant to blend into the background of your own life. The potential you carry is far larger than the limitations you have accepted. The 10x rule is not just a method of achieving more. It is a way of remembering who you are before doubt was learned. It is a return to the size your spirit was always meant to occupy. Not because the world needs another successful person, but because it needs another undeniable one. If this message resonated with you, subscribe and join us for more wisdom that fuels growth.